everybody. Welcome to my theater. Or rather, it's just a little room in our house that is used to watch movies in, and hence, old school theater seating. A perfect setup for a new little series I'm doing, because I feel like it's a kind of a fun, odd, quirky little thing to do, especially in quarantine where the capabilities of going outdoors and really having any kind of adventure without having anxiety about getting sick. You got to find other ways to create content, and I've been on a major 70s film spree recently, and I've been watching a lot of kind of more obscure, more lower budget, and definitely less reputable films, primarily from the 70s. I am a 70s, particularly 70s crime drama nut. It's probably my favorite era of film is 70s crime dramas and all their facets. So anyway, with some recent viewings I've done, I've decided to create a new little series for my channel, because why not? And in this series I'm going to be looking at and reviewing, and to a degree rating, some of the lesser respectable pieces of cinema out there. And I'm trying to focus on the 70s for this specifically, because what a time. And in this series, I'm essentially using IMDb and Rotten Tomato scores to establish what qualifies for my series. So these have to be films that got, no better than maybe like a 40 on Rotten Tomatoes, and a film that did below a 6 on IMDb. There's plenty of movies that are crap that have 6 point something ratings. And I'm going to be reviewing 2 films per episode, because if I do an episode for every single movie, it's going to just pile up. So I feel like I don't want to review like 20 movies in one video, so I'm going to review just 2 per. And this is the first episode in that series, so let's get into it with the first film I'm going to cover, which I just finished watching 5 minutes ago, literally. And that is I don't know if I've seen, some sources say it was 1979, some say it was 1980. IMDb says it's 1980, so I'm going with 1980. I thought it was done a lot earlier, because the production quality, it looks like an early 70s film. It's not great visual quality. And that is the 1980, again presumably, Telly Sevalas film, Border Cop. Now, I never watched Kojak. I've never really watched anything. I maybe have seen a film or two where Telly Savalas was like a background character, but this is the first thing I ever watched where he's like a primary character. That being said, he's the name that clearly sells this thing. Other than him, Michael Gazzo is the only other actor in the film that you might recognize. I'm pretty sure he was in the Godfather films, but he was in a series of other things. I remember he was the guy that Clint Eastwood gives a heart attack to in Sudden Impact. He was in another movie I watched recently, but I can't remember what. Anyway, and the film follows Telly Savalas is, as the name denotes, he is a border cop. He's an officer that works on the border of the U.S. and Mexico. So, it's his job to catch anyone who has trying to, smuggle illegal immigrants over the border. Certainly something that has, pretty strong prominence today with just everything that's going on. And what's interesting about the film is that Telly Savalas, as a border cop, he's actually very sympathetic towards, and he's really bonds closely with a lot of these Mexican families that live near the border. So there's almost like a kind of internal conflict. Like, he has this job to do, but like there's a scene where he goes out with this other border cop, and they all of a sudden see a bunch of Mexican people like running across this, and they're miles from the border, and the guy pulls his gun out, and Telly Savalas is like, "What the hell are you doing?" Because obviously he wants these people to be as safe as possible. If they cross the border and he has to do his job, he has to do his job, but he doesn't want these people to face any pain. And he has a particular bond with this one young Mexican guy who gets married and then ends up becoming part of this group that gets moved across the border to work at a slaughterhouse, which was kind of a shift in the film. That's the one thing. Like if it's Telly Savalas and you're really trying to rely on him to carry you through the film, let it be known. And again, obviously, there's going to be spoilers in this. I'm reviewing the whole thing. The movie's 87 minutes long, and like the middle 30 minutes of the film, there's no Telly Savalas. You're following these Mexican laborers that have been brought to a slaughterhouse to do, and it's kind of rough. It's rough to watch because they bring this kid with them, who, you know, all these other workers are, you know, at least young adults, if not older, and then there's this kid that's like 10, 12 years old, and like they show him standing there and watching this guy kind of brutally start gutting a cow, you know, in the slaughterhouse, and like there's a scene where, and it shows the racism. The kid like falls asleep in this hallway in the slaughterhouse building, and these white guys that work there, they open the door and see him sleeping there, and to wake him up, they throw a huge bucket full of cow blood on him. It's messed up. And I was actually, again, I should have mentioned this in the start, but, you know, every first episode is kind of rough. This is a film, it doesn't even have a Rotten Tomatoes score. It didn't even show up in their stuff. It has a 4.5 on IMDb, so that's a pretty crappy score. I mean, you're going to find made-for-TV, knockoff, wannabe Nickelodeon level stuff that's got higher ratings than that. And I think that there's reasons for that. First of all, outside of Telly Savalas and Michael Gazza, the acting is horrible. I mean, it was a low-budget film. And the visual quality... Now, again, I got this on a, you know, cheap, like, here's 100... public domain films for $5 kind of thing. So, I mean, it doesn't look like the quality of the copy I got was probably much worse than any other copy of the movie out there, and I'm pretty sure the only way you're going to find a movie like Border Cop is through a succession of different small distributors who primarily focus on distributing public domain films. But, yeah, again, I thought this was an early 70s movie just because of the video quality. And yeah, if there's a nighttime scene, you're barely going to see anything. Then anything that happens at night is so horribly lit. There was actually some kind of dramatic moments in the film, and I'm not 100% certain what happened because it's so dark. Now again, that could be just the quality of the transfer I have, or it just really wasn't lit well, or it was lit okay, but they had mediocre quality cameras. I can't say. Now, the last 15 minutes of the film are actually pretty solid. You know, one of the things the film suffers from, and I don't really know how to explain it, is, you know, the shots that are supposed to be steady, like this, just a steady shot. And, you know, even if it's moving, the camera's panning, it's stable. Every steady shot in this film looked like somebody put a camera on a heavy tripod to be steady, but then picked up the tripod and handheld it. There's all these shots that are supposed to be steady, but they're like moving. And yeah, I read one review that was pretty accurate. He said it's a yawn but not boring. That was the one like random person review I saw for this film. And it's kind of true. Like, you kind of stay invested, but again, it's 87 minutes long, and aside from the first 5 minutes and the last 15 minutes, we're kind of being dragged along a little bit. Now, you do get to see a representation of how poorly these Mexican laborers were treated once they crossed the border, which is, I mean, good for you, 1980 film. There's a lot of people in America today that still can't even acknowledge that. But, you know, when you first turn the movie on, you're going to think, wow, this is going to be a pretty action-adventure film, because the first 5 minutes, there's more action and excitement than the next 50 minutes. Because the film opens on this open stretch of road, and Telly Sevalas and his partner are these border cops are sitting alongside the road. They wave this guy down. He has a couple of illegals that are literally like strapped under his car. And, you know, they pull him over, they stop him, and when the guy realizes that they're onto him, he takes off, and his cop buddy gets stuck on his hood, and there's this car chase kind of meandering across the road and into the desert and so on and so forth. And that's kind of your big opening scene. They did what you're supposed to do. They hooked you with an action-packed opening sequence, only to have very limited action, again, for the next, like, 45 minutes. But the ending, again, the ending takes place at nighttime, so there's a lot of moments where it's really hard to make out exactly what you're seeing. But, you know, when you first turn the movie on, you're going to think, wow, this is going to be a pretty action-adventure film, because the first 5 minutes, there's more action and excitement than the next 50 minutes. The latter portion, like the lead Mexican laborer, the actor who plays him is, I mean, he's not terrible for the time and obviously the production level and probably the budget level of the film, but he's a pretty crappy actor. But yeah, there's some stuff in the film that again is pretty hard to watch. But the ending, I will tell you this. I don't want to spoil the ending, but the last 15 minutes are actually pretty exciting. There's a fight that happens in this one. Maybe it's a bar. And it's really random because whenever like a punch is made or someone's like hit really hard, there's like a reverberation of the sound. So if someone gets hit and goes like, ah, it's like,
come on.
It's a little, I mean, I think they were just trying to be edgy, but it's kind of off-putting at the same time. But yeah, no, the final stretch is, and there's some certain elements you don't know exactly what's going to happen. But there's like 3 or 4 kind of action-packed vignettes, if you will, that finish out the film. And I think it was a made-for-TV movie. It has very made-for-TV movie vibes to it, especially the opening scene looks like it could be out of, again, this action-packed opening scene looks like it could be out of any, 70s action film. But the further you get into it, the more you kind of feel like you're watching kind of a rough 70s made-for-TV movie, like a very rough made-for-TV 70s movie. But I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed the ending. And again, one of the reasons I'm doing this series is because a lot of these movies I tend to enjoy a lot more than the critics have. But that doesn't mean I'm going to like every single one of them. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised at how much I enjoyed the ending, again, with how hard it was to see some things at night in the film. And if I was going to rate it on IMDb, if I was going to give it a very specific number, I'd give it like a high 5, like a 5.8, 5.9. Again, it suffers from a lot of stuff. It's, not the most invigorating film there is. It has a very made-for-TV look to it. The video quality, the production quality is kind of crappy. The cinematography is not that gripping at all. There's a few, decent shots through there. But as a whole, the way it's done, it's just kind of, it's like someone was told, hey, we need to make an action-y made-for-TV movie. Here's like $500,000. Go get some semi-big name and make it happen. And they just kind of did what they could with what they had. It's not bad. It drags a lot in the middle, but it's not bad. It's just, it suffers from being a cheap, low-budget film. You're not going to get the best script in the world. You're not going to get the best cinematographer in the world. You're not going to get the best lighting in the world. You're not going to get the best actors in the world when you have that. But for what they had to work with, they probably spent half their budget just getting Telly Sevalas to even be in the film. For what they had to work with, it actually was not too bad. And while the IMDb voters as a whole give it a 4.5, I'd land at a 5.8 personally for this film. And that being said, let's go to the second one. And it's clearly another day, but who cares? So the second film that I perused, which I had, again, a lot of these movies I bought them in these big, cram a bunch of movies together and sell them for a couple of bucks and make some kind of profit. And a lot of these I bought during like the late to like 2008, 2009, 2010, kind of in that area. So I've had a lot of these movies for a very long time, just kind of stored away. And this next film I remember kind of passively watching because I bought this collection of action films, which Border Cop was part of that collection. So these are both from this action movie collection. And so yeah, I scanned through this one movie once, but I didn't really remember it that well. I remembered the car chase, I remembered some of the people that were in it, but when I watched it, there was so much about it I didn't remember. I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. I thought it was going to kind of drag a little bit because the early objective in the film ultimately ends up not really being what the latter half of the film actually follows. And this is this is another film where like different dates have been given, but I'm pretty sure it's 1971. 1971 Charles Bronson film called Cold Sweat. And I believe this film actually went under some different names, but that's kind of the name it's generally known as. And this is, Charles Bronson was already well established at this time, and he was kind of slowly becoming more of a consistent leading man. This is pre-Death Wish. And, as opposed to Border Cop, which was just very amateurish looking all around, you did have some prominent actors in this film, even though, it had a very, very much a foreign film, because it was filmed in the south of France. So, I'm not sure how much of the production team was actually, or how much of the director, I don't think was French. He might have been, but it was one of those films that's predominantly filmed, in a foreign country where most people probably don't speak that much English, but everybody in the film speaks English. But yeah, Charles Bronson is the lead role. Liv Ullmann is in it as his wife. And one of the very interesting things is James Mason is in it. He's one of the bad guys in the film. James Mason of, iconic old Hollywood. He was the main bad guy in North by Northwest. He had a very distinct accent. And this probably bothers me more than anything else in the film, is the fact that they brought on James Mason, a guy with a very dignified look to him, who had this very strong, sophisticated accent. And they had him come on to play this kind of swirly, if that's the right term, but he was this guy that had like a southern twang, but his S's would kind of creep in, so he'd be like, well, we're doing this, and then this. You'd start hearing those James Mason S's coming out. And so it was kind of hard. I mean, I think if you don't know who James Mason is and you watch it, you're not going to know. But when you know James Mason and you know how he commonly acted and spoke, it was kind of hard to kind of get past this accent. And it is kind of a, because you think, like, why would James Mason take a small role in this very kind of B foreign film where he's just this bad guy and he's supposed to be like kind of an American with a southern accent? But it's important to remember, and this is really tragic to me, but a lot of these great actors from the 40s and 50s and maybe even into the 60s, by the 70s, there was so many more independent films being made. There was a lot of TV movies being made, and a lot of these iconic actors got shoved into these like TV movies and stuff, and their careers kind of became their careers later in life. I know, like, Ida Lupino ended up in a lot of kind of B and TV movies. Richard Basehart ended up in a lot of those movies. A lot of these, so it kind of made sense with it being the 70s, as someone like James Mason, like, these would be kind of the roles he was stuck with later in life. And it's really tragic, they just kind of, films definitely were changing, but it was kind of sad that these iconic actors, a lot of them got shoved into these low-end productions, because maybe a lot of them, that was like all they could really get anymore. But anyway, Cold Sweat follows Charles Bronson is living again in the south of France with his wife Liv Ullmann and his like 12-year-old stepdaughter. They're they're living the life. They got a nice boat. They got they live right on the water, and Charles Bronson's past comes back to nip him. Essentially, 7 years earlier, he pulled off a prison break with these 3 other men, James Mason being one of them. And he was going to be the driver. When they all escaped, he was going to be the driver. But as they attempted to escape, an officer, a German police officer, stumbled onto them. And one of the guys decided to shoot the officer dead. And Charles Bronson was like, well, okay, I was in this for a prison break. I wasn't in this for murder. So he took off and left them behind. So they were recaptured and ended up doing more time in prison. So they have an axe to grind with Charles Bronson, even though he, did the right thing, somewhat. I mean, he was prison breaking. And so they come back to exact revenge in the form of they need to take his boat. He has a really fast boat, and they want to use his boat to... there's like a Turkish boat they're trying to get to that has like lots of drugs on it that they're probably going to make a bunch of money on. So you think... at that point, you think, okay, this is going to be, one of these kind of movies where it's just them, these guys that used to work together back in the day, and now they're stuck together, but there's animosity, and they got to do this job together. So that's how it starts. And then midway through, and, I feel like it does a disservice to the film because I feel like it kind of distracts you and all of a sudden you get stuck in this very brief period of time taking up this huge chunk of the film. But at the same time, it does keep your interest. There is tension in it. About halfway through the film, Charles Bronson picks up this woman who's like in love with James Mason, an actress named Jill Ireland, who actually was in a lot of Charles Bronson's films because they were man and wife. And Charles Bronson decides to take her and hide her in this cabin in the middle of nowhere. And so he essentially strikes a deal with James Mason and those guys. I'll tell you where she is, give you her back if you let my wife and daughter go free. My apologies. I had to pause briefly because I had a drink made for me. Delightful. So anyway, James Mason and the group agree to let his wife and daughter go. They get into one of the cars they have, they go to drive away, and then James Mason tells one of the guys to open fire on him. You think, oh God, Charles Bronson's family's gonna die. But then Charles Bronson jumps the guy. So his wife and stepdaughter, narrowly escape death, but in the jumping him and he's firing bullets, he ends up killing one of the three guys, and he ends up shooting James Mason in the stomach. So the movie at this point shifts from this, deal that these guys want to do to them trying to keep James Mason alive. Because the other guy that's with him is kind of a loose cannon, and pretty much if James Mason dies, this guy's probably just going to kill all of them anyway. And there's always kind of an overarching idea that regardless of what Charles Bronson does, by the time things are done, these guys are probably going to kill Charles Bronson and his family anyway. But they got guns on him and his family, so he's got to kind of do what they say and hope to get away with something. And it's fun. There's these little vignette moments of Charles Bronson just kind of conning people, being like, oh, look out for this, oh, boom, and then knocking them out. And there's a scene where he's walking up to a car and Jill Ireland's character's with him, and she's got a gun. They're like, shoot him if he does anything dumb. And then as they go up to the car, he throws the door open and it hits her hand and knocks the gun out, and he gets the gun away from her. So little things like that. But the film becomes pretty much an effort to keep James Mason alive, and he's bleeding out of his stomach, so they're like, you've got an hour to live. So Charles Bronson has to go try to get a doctor there in time to try to help James Mason. And it's interesting because whether James Mason survives or not is not really fully expressed. He probably died, but they honestly are a little ambiguous about it. But here's the thing is, they give him an hour, after about an hour, I'm going to bleed out so much that I'm going to pass out and die. And so Charles Bronson goes off, gets a doctor, and he's speeding to get back, through these hillside roads and stuff out in, the middle of nowhere south of France. And they get to a point where it's been an hour, and James Mason asks his cohort, how much time do I have left? And the other guy with him's like, none. So you're like, okay, he's about to die. Charles Bronson needs to show up right now. Then what proceeds to follow is a 7-minute car chase with Charles Bronson trying to elude these motorcycle officers. And it's a decent, for the the low budget quality of the film, it's a decent chase sequence. It's not great, but it's decent. But it's so long, and the whole time you're watching it, you're like, okay, James Mason is dead by now. James Mason is dead by now. And then all this other stuff happens. And it's forever before Charles Bronson gets back with a doctor. But yeah, the film, it never really loses your interest. It lags a little bit in parts. It's got kind of an interesting, the way things develop. And the ending is pretty decent, if not a little bit rushed, in my opinion. It's one of these things where the kind of climactic ending of the film takes place over 3 minutes. It's just a sudden scene at the end of the film. Obviously, I don't want to spoil everything. So it's a little, the pacing is a little bit choppy at times. And again, this was a foreign film. There may have been a lot of French influence on it, and maybe that was a very more French thing than American. I really don't know. It may have just been the way it was done. The script may have just been written that way. I don't know. But it's a decent, little crime drama, little revenge film, if you will. At least an effort to take revenge out on the good guy who's not totally a good guy. It definitely, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought it was, because I remembered scanning through it, but again, I didn't really remember much about it, and a lot of what I saw I didn't remember at all, so it was very much like watching a film I'd never seen before. And this is definitely not going to be the only 70s Charles Bronson film that's going to pop up on here. I have an odd appreciation for some of his, a lot of the films he did during the 70s was him literally just kind of playing the same character over and over again, kind of like what Liam Neeson got stuck doing after he started doing the Taken movies. I did forget, I want to remember to do this at the start, but I forgot to give you the IMDb and Rotten Tomato scores for these films. Because again, these are films that I'm reviewing specifically because they're kind of known for not being that good, at least critically speaking, or viewer voting speaking. And this movie has a 5.8 on IMDb, so it's like just barely under the threshold of that 6. And it's only got a 20 on Rotten Tomatoes. If I had to choose between the two, I'd definitely say production-wise, quality, I mean, it probably had a bigger budget, so it had a better cast and stuff, but just overall, I think objectively, Cold Sweat is definitely better. The movie's almost... Cold Sweat almost looks like it was made later than Border Cop because of the differences in production quality, but it was made 9 years earlier. So with IMDb giving it a 5.8, I'd give Cold Sweat as a whole like a... I'd give it a 6.5. I was dabbling between a 6.3, then a 6.4, 6.2. Let's go with 6.5 if I was to give it a very specific IMDb rating. I'd say about a 6.5. It's by no means great. It's by no means iconic, but it's entertaining. It serves its purpose, and there are, while it kind of follows a kind of commonly followed storyline and concept, there's nothing that's really going to shock you about the film. There were some elements of it that I think made it kind of distinct and unique compared to other films of a similar style. So yeah, 6.5 for that one. And that is it for my first episode reviewing notoriously, I guess. So that's it for me reviewing, this new series I'm doing, reviewing films primarily from the 70s that are regarded as notoriously bad, and giving you my take on it. So thank you for watching, and trust me, I will be back for more episodes.